Concolor azteca, also known as puma, cougar, mountain lion. Over the last century, man's relationship with this mysterious and elusive predator has changed. Dangerous encounters are increasing, and scientists aren't sure why. What is clear is there are no winners in this growing conflict between humans and North America's most magnificent cat. Attacks from cougars are still rare, but on the rise. In the past 50 years, about 80 people have lost their lives or been injured, most of these attacks occurring in the last decade, and no one knows precisely why. An opportunity to learn more recently presented itself in southern Alberta when a mother cougar wandered onto the Trans-Canada Highway. The results were tragic. She was killed, leaving behind 4 orphaned cougar kittens.
Over time, we started to see a lot of kitten tracks, and because they were close to an area that's frequented by people, we realized there was a large chance these animals could get harassed or disturbed, and also because the situation was somewhat unnatural and the mother, meeting her end on the highway, we decided to capture them.
The story was a media sensation. Parks Canada was hesitant to save the cubs, but caught in the public eye. They had no choice. The kittens were brought here to the Calgary Wildlife Rehabilitation Society on the outskirts of Calgary, where a team of volunteers became their new family. Leading the team was veterinarian Lise Desailliers, who had no doubts about the wisdom of saving the cubs.
If we're not going to save 3 cougars and make an argument for saving 3 cougars, why should we bother really saving lower order animals that are at the bottom of the food chain, like sparrows or deer or any of these prey species?
Others disagreed. The decision to raise the cubs, dubbed Project Cougar, set off a storm of controversy in the wildlife management community.
She's a little aggressive, this one. Yeah. She's more likely to jump.
We have to manage all wildlife the same, whether it's cute or not. There's too many people in it that feel sorry for the animal and not for the species.
The main thing we want to learn is the behavior of these cats and the behavior of people, and how, if people want to have pumas here in the future, then we need to learn how to live with them.
We did some research and found out that, captive rearing programs in the past hadn't been too successful, and for that reason we're not really optimistic here, but we've hopefully taken all the precautions that we possibly can.
If we don't think the benefits are there, then I don't think we should be sticking our fingers everywhere and slapping collars and ear tags on.
The only things that we can manage are humans. In fact, the only thing we can really ever manage is ourselves. And so we need to start sharing really broadly a whole notion of restraint, and to not simply take our toys, our mountain bikes, our quads, our skis, someplace just because we can.
The cubs were 6 weeks old when rescued. Had they been left in the snow, they'd have died. One of the 4 did die from malnutrition and exposure, but the other 3 pulled through, becoming a living experiment in animal management. "40 miles east of San Diego, at California's Cuyamaca Rancho State Park, researchers Ken Logan and Linda Swainer were watching Project Cougar with interest. They are 2 of North America's foremost cougar experts and are dedicated to a better understanding of cougar behavior.
It's very important to keep in mind that as the United States and Canada were settled, Humans were killing all of the big predators. We shot pumas, we trapped pumas, we poisoned pumas. And by doing that, we probably imposed very strong selective pressures for pumas that avoided humans.
But the Calgary Cougars could not avoid humans. In fact, they'd become celebrities, being raised as wild animals on the outskirts of a city.
We have to take responsibility toward these animals because of their true nature, because of their intrinsic value, but also because humans are often responsible for what happens to them.
For most of the next year, the cubs lived in a volunteer-made enclosure being fed roadkill. Scientists watched and wondered whether they would retain their sense of wildness, or would history repeat itself with yet another disappointment for these cougars and their caregivers. Cougars once lived throughout most of North America, but as the continent became settled, they were seen as a threat to livestock and competition for game. Today, bounties are no longer in effect, but their habitat has been greatly reduced.
It's important to keep in mind that these puma populations are increasing and recolonizing in historical habitat in a completely different environment than was present, say, 300 years ago. Now, there are literally millions of humans living in and recreating in this puma habitat.
But as we move into cougar country, are we aware of the possibilities of contact? Would we know how to react? Would we know how to protect ourselves? Cougar attacks don't happen often, but they do happen, and animal management experts aren't sure why. Cindy Parolin, her daughter, and two of her boys were riding to meet up with the rest of the family. They were enjoying the first day of their vacation together when tragedy struck.
We're going along and everything was normal. Then our horse just stopped.
It was just like a flash.
And he jumped up and swiped at Steve and missed and kind of patted the horse's bum, and she jumped and he swiped again and knocked Steven off.
I remember and it all went black.
I remember my mom, she told him as the cougar was going for him, she's like, "Hold on, Stephen." And she jumped off really quick and she went over to a tree and broke off a branch and she just jabbed it with a stick, and then she got on top of it and put her arm in its mouth like this, and she was sitting on it and holding it down. She says, "Go find Dad."
And once we got around a couple of corners, I left my younger brother and sister to go get my father.
The first people David found were Jim Mannion and Karen Soule. After checking on Stephen, they drove to the attack site. Cindy Parolin was nowhere to be found.
And Jim asked me if we had the right spot, and I said, "Sure, we're positive this is the right spot."
I couldn't see anything, and it was kind of I had a, like a chill going up and down my spine. There was supposed to be a big scene here of 6 horses and, and the kids on the ground. It was just like nothing had happened.
Jim walked a bit further down the road where he discovered Cindy's coat.
And it was just kind of like laid down there. Not being able to see anything, I hollered out, "Cindy."
From deep within the bushes, she answered faintly.
I said to her, "Cindy, is the cat right next to you?" And she there again said very faintly but positively, "Yes." And then at that point, that really gave us pretty much the exact location, although we still couldn't see anything. So I said, "Cindy, we have your children, and they're all okay." She said at that time, "I'm dying."
Jim stepped into the bushes and finally saw Cindy and the cat.
I could see her from here down.
Jim shouted and threw a rock, but the cat just stared. He was now faced with the challenge of getting the cat away from her.
If I was to shoot at the cat, I was scared of possibly hitting Cindy at the same time.
Jim fired a shot above the cat's head.
Didn't even flinch his ears. At this point now, we're really starting to run out of options. And so the other option was send the dog in. So I said, okay, Trim, get him. And he just went right after the cat.
Like a flash, the cougar lunged at the dog and they tumbled through the bush. As the dog raced to the safety of the truck, the cougar turned his attention to Jim.
And he just turned and he just started right for me.
Jim squeezed the trigger. The gun had jammed.
He stopped. So at that point, we locked eyes. And we were just staring at each other.
Karen and David were watching from the side of the road as the cougar slowly advanced on Jim.
And as he stepped one step backwards, the cat took one step forward. And it was like they had gone into a trance.
Jim was almost at the truck when all at once, the cat charged.
I know I hit him. I seen the fur ruffled. I seen some of the few rocks off the road, pebbles come up right from the shot. But he was gone. It was incredible how far up that hill he went. He cleared the road, the ditch, and way up the hill, all in one leap. And in 2 more bounds, he was out of sight and gone.
The cougar that Jim Mannion shot was found dead the next day by officials. Cindy's family believes a second cat may have been responsible for her death.
She was watching the one cat, and the other one, a lot of us feel she didn't see it coming. It took her from behind.
Cindy's jacket was found neatly folded in the ditch, almost as if it had been placed there.
That if she was in any danger, she obviously wouldn't have folded her jacket and set it down in the ditch.
Although Cindy Parolin died from the attack, her son fully recovered. Among other things, she was a mother, a wife, and an important leader in her community. The attack on Cindy Parolin occurred on a remote logging road, but encounters are becoming more widespread, and this has experts worried. Jack Lay is a retired predator hunter. He has professionally hunted problem animals his entire career.
The cougar has changed in the last 40 years. The attacks are and not only attacks, the sightings of cougar by humans, becoming more common because, number one, we have more cats. Number two, there are more people in the woods. 30 years ago, you found the odd cross-country skier in the wintertime. Nobody went out and snowshoed. Nobody traveled on bikes. We travel into the remote part by the dozen. Very, very seldom did they show themselves in the daytime. Here today, we find cats walking down the road, crossing roads, going into trappers' sets, going into trappers' cabins, living under buildings, and that kind of thing.
As incredible as it seems, mountain lions are also showing up in our cities. The Fairmont Empress Hotel in downtown Victoria, built in 1908, is better known for hosting visiting kings and queens. When a mountain lion wandered into the hotel parkade, management quickly closed off access to the parking levels and drove through the parkade to rescue surprise guests and visitors. Police and conservation officers were called to the prestigious hotel, where the cougar was eventually tranquilized and safely relocated into the wild. Incidents like this are becoming more common. No one knows this better than Craig Gabicki, who was at work one day when he met his most memorable customer.
And I was sitting at my desk all alone in the office, and all of a sudden out of the corner of my eye I saw a tail. I look up looking for a customer, but there wasn't one, because I thought it was a dog. And I turned my head back to my desk, and all of a sudden out of my peripheral vision I see this head, and I'm like, oh my God, that's a cougar. And it put its paws up on the window, all relaxed, looking out, no care in the world. And then all of a sudden it made eye contact with me. It was the most incredible feeling. It was like terror, fear. You just don't know what to do. I didn't know whether or not I'm supposed to run, which I found out later you're not supposed to, or are you supposed to act big and strong, or are you just supposed to stay still? I had no idea. I just did what I thought was best. I just ran out the door. Maybe a split second afterwards, I heard this thud, and that was when I found out later it was the cougar hit the door.
This cougar was tranquilized and relocated, but only after computers, printers, and other office equipment were destroyed, causing more than $5,000 worth of damages. How do incidents like this happen? Researchers Ken Logan and Linda Swainer are trying to find out.
Unfortunately, there really isn't very good information about the circumstances that actually triggered puma attacks on humans. And we need to better understand why individual pumas attack humans.
To do this, Ken and Linda need to gather as much information as possible. This means trapping and identifying individual pumas so that they can be radio collared and better studied. This information helps officials to make decisions on everything, from the placement of homes and campgrounds to how to respond if a puma is encountered in the wild.
The question we have is, are pumas using the same areas that people are? Are they attracted to people areas? Are they trying to avoid people? Or is it something that it doesn't seem to matter where the people are versus where the pumas are? The other factor in this is where the deer in the park are.
Ken and Linda will do things we all do. Things like hiking, tenting, and bike riding. They will do these things in relatively close proximity to the cougars and monitor the response.
All the time that we are staging these activities, we will be tracking our own movements in relation to the puma's movements so that we can begin to get a handle on how individual pumas respond to these various human activities.
Millions of visitors spend time in puma habitat each year. Very few ever see mountain lions, but they see us.
It's still an extremely rare occurrence to ever have an incident or an attack from a puma. And when you consider the number of people that visit puma habitat every year, and you can think about the capability of the cat. You put a human in that situation, and people, we don't have any capabilities for easily fighting off such a formidable predator. To me, it says a lot for the animal that such a powerful animal who is so capable of predator will avoid people at almost all costs in most cases.
But when they don't avoid humans, even a small cougar can overpower a full-grown man. John Nostel was returning home the night he encountered a mountain lion.
Every once in a while I would hear this sound of almost like fingernails on a tabletop, a regular sort of cadence, and I would convince myself that it was my jacket. Suddenly I was knocked off the bike completely. I was quite confused. As I tried to stand up, I realized there was some weight on my back. So I bent forward, and the backpack and the cat came over my shoulder and fell on the road in front of me. He sort of erupted out of the pavement and rushed my face. I was able to get my arms up in front of me. We were just sort of waltzing, and if I couldn't stay strong and if my stamina broke, that the cat was going to be the one that won. Once the animal's at your throat, and that's where they want to be, I think it's game over.
Elliot Cole was returning home from work when he came upon the scene.
I thought just driving up would have been enough to scare the cougar away. When it didn't move, I reached into the truck and grabbed my bag of books and hit the cougar in the head twice with it.
He saw that wasn't working, he used his bare fist.
And I fully expected one punch. That cat was coming off of John at me. Never hit anything that hard and just had it look at me. No reaction at all, really.
Elliot was then able to use my bicycle to drive a wedge or a barrier between the cat and me.
At which point it took its paw off John's face, I think, and shoved it through the spokes of the bike at me.
I guess he stood on it, so now the cat was trapped underneath the bicycle. And Elliot said, you know, get in the truck, get in the truck. So we both sort of dived into the same door of the truck. Turned out the cat was underneath the truck. Then he took me to the hospital.
Officials hunted for the cat that attacked John for several days before ending their search. It was never found. It was a juvenile cat weighing approximately 40 pounds. John, weighing 165 pounds and at 6 feet 1 inch tall, was fortunate to survive. Jerry Brunham and Peter Powells are conservation officers on Vancouver Island who are often called in when mountain lions are discovered in urban areas.
So you get a cougar that may pass through this area and it's seen by children playing in the field or seen by somebody on their way to school, and we get the call and we attend and try and see if the cougar is still in the area. Cougars can coexist with people. If they're not doing anything wrong, we prefer to give them that chance to coexist. Just because there's a cougar in your area doesn't mean you have to live in fear of it.
Cougars are dynamic, they're ever changing, and as we speak, they're learning to coexist with us quite well. They interact with us a lot more than we ever know, and the reason we know that is we've done lots of studies where we have radio collars on them. We know they come into cities, they come into town through our green spaces and travel corridors. They're not all negative experiences by any means, but yes, we are interacting with cougars on an increasing basis.
In this case, the cougar sighting turned out to be a false alarm. It was just a regular house cat. But when reports of a cougar sighting become public, children are often kept in during recess, pets are brought inside, and entire towns go on alert.
You find oftentimes with the general public is they have either a total love affair with the cougar, or they have the opposite where they're totally afraid and every cougar should be a dead cougar.
For the most part, I think cougars like to keep their distance. They like to avoid people. They don't see us as a source of food unless they're absolutely starving.
And they're just naturally a timid animal, and nature has made them that way because if they suffer an injury in nature, their chances of recovery are very slight. So if an elk kicks them and breaks a leg, then it's over for that cougar.
Most mountain lion attacks are by animals less than 2 years of age. Once young cougars leave their mothers, they have to kill on their own and either kill off or defend themselves from other cougars.
And that's a tough road to haul, and sometimes as they start to decline in health, i.e. their body mass starts to go down, they're losing weight, then they lose their strength and they're unable to bring down a deer. Now you've got a cougar that's not healthy enough to bring down a deer even when he comes across his natural prey. So then what does he do? He moves into where he can get on top of prey that he knows he can handle, house cats, small dogs.
Barry Mack was on his way home when his dog started to act strange.
I figured my dog was barking for at least 2 days before the attack happened. Little did I know is that cougar was stalking my dog.
The night of the attack, Barry ran to save his dog, not realizing the potential danger he was in.
I was only, 2 feet from it, and I realized there was an actual cougar staring right at me on top of my dog. I asked my brother, should I shoot? Should I shoot? And he says, go ahead. I took 4 shots, and I missed every one of them.
Clarence Hall was called by conservation officers to investigate the attack. Not expecting the cat to still be in the area, he wandered into the bushes. Thinking the cat was asleep and hadn't seen him, Clarence turned back.
And then very softly I began sneaking out of there, and I did turn my back fully against that animal.
He had just cleared the brush when the cat struck him from behind.
See that cougar right on top of him, and then it was twisting its back legs around trying to choke him out. Like the cougar was moving with every move that he did. He was trying to put his fingers in the mouth, and at the same time the cougar was biting down, so I could hear him scream because of the teeth were biting right through his fingers.
While Barry ran to get his gun, Clarence continued to struggle.
I just put the barrel right to his chest, you know, and I pulled the trigger and you could see it go through. And then that cougar just, you know, just looked at me. That's all I did. And I jumped back because it scared me. Took 3 shots and I could see it go through his spine. And then it started to shake, started to quiver.
Finally, the cougar died.
Clarence had to grab both sides of the teeth, both sides of the jaw, and then pull it out of his throat. I think that was the harshest thing I've seen.
I'm just thankful this young man came by when he did.
The cougar that attacked Clarence Hall and Barry Mack's dog was a 6-year-old female.
I believe this cougar was hurting. It had porcupine quills in its paws, in its mouth, and clear all the way down stuck in its throat and in the stomach. I had a very deep compassion would be the word I could use for this cougar. I felt sorry for it.
Most people who've experienced an attack now regard mountain lions with an even greater respect.
As an agent of death, this animal somehow had this awesome beauty and power to it. It's their ground. It's the last of what they've got. And we're the encroachers.
It makes me have a little more respect for them. Now I think they're one of the most beautiful animals. Now that I've seen it up close, it was just magnificent.
They're one of the greatest animals we've got. We need them. We need them to thin certain game animals. We have to have them, and they're a part of our country.
The growing concern over the Hall, Nostell, and Parolin attacks showed the need for more study of cougar behavior, and biologists wondered if important lessons might be learned from the Project Cougar animals back in Calgary. No longer media darlings, the kittens had grown into powerful, strong adolescents. But could they survive in the wild? Had they somehow learned to hunt? Or would they be drawn inexorably towards humans? Martin Jolkowski and Robert Barclay are wildlife biologists who acted as consultants on Project Cougar.
Sure, yeah, especially if it's not. They have all the right instincts. They're chasing rabbits, killing rabbits. A lot of the other behaviors that I've heard described sound pretty typical for wild cougars, so you know, they probably have a pretty good chance of making it. Whether or not they make it through the first winter when things do get a lot harder for them, well, we'll see.
In the wild, mountain lion cubs stay with their mother for up to 18 months. She prepares them for life on their own and teaches them to hunt. The Calgary Cougars had no role models. All they knew, they learned alone. The volunteers fed them rabbits, partridges, and gophers. They called these meals fast food.
I think one of the aspects, and something that they've been very careful here at the center to try to maintain, is the cougar's natural wariness of humans, and that's one sort of behavior that we may be looking at, is how cautious are they around human influences. I suspect there's very little known about this early stage of the development of behaviors in young cougars. They're hard to study in the wild, they're very elusive, and we know more about adult behavior than we do about sort of the development of behaviors of young animals.
Human contact needs to be eliminated or held to a minimum so that those cubs do not associate caregiving or food with human beings. They need to be wild cubs when they're released into the wild, and when they are released, they need to be released into as wild and remote country as is possible, where it's known that that is good puma habitat.
The volunteers did all they could to avoid contact. But how close is too close? A meter or a mile? No one knew. Everyone just hoped for the best.
It's an opportunity that sort of fell into our lap, essentially. Here we have a captive situation, so you can make observations that you can't make in the wild, but the animals haven't been exposed to much of human behavior, and therefore we may get a better inkling about what the natural behaviors are rather than what captive behaviors are.
And when those captive raised puma cubs are released into the wild, we need to place radio collars on them so that we can quantify their survival as well as their behavior, so that we can learn if those experiments work. If the preponderance of the data from those experiments shows that it doesn't work, then we need to consider whether it's a sensible activity to do with those orphan cubs. We may learn that it's more humane to euthanize those cubs, even though it may not be a popular decision.
Early July, release day. The cougars are just 9 months old, but today they'll be returned to the wilderness. With the promise of an easy meal, they are quickly captured and caged. Cougars are considered high-stress animals. Their hearts and metabolism are easily affected by change. So Lise Decellier and her team of volunteers work hard to keep the stress of the journey to a minimum.
She's 58.1 pounds. She's gained 5 pounds.
Okay, sit up. Okay.
After being carefully anesthetized, the animals were fitted with radio collars to allow biologists the chance to monitor their hunting patterns and the territories they would establish. The decision to set them free at so young an age was not easy. It was feared that if they stayed in their enclosure any longer, they'd imprint on humans. A summer release meant these inexperienced hunters could encounter inexperienced newborn prey, giving them the best possible chances for survival.
I think they're going to be a little overwhelmed at first, but hopefully being together will help them deal with that. But winter for us will be the benchmark, you know. Are they making it, first of all, they make it this summer, but are they making it through the winter? It's a true carnivore, it only eats meat, so it can't rely like a bear on berries or any other thing, so it has to kill. They have a big job in front of them. Deer, you release them, as long as they're grass, they're going to survive. But a cougar is another story.
Every precaution was taken to ensure the release point would be as remote as possible. But the decision to release them at all was controversial.
To turn them loose before 18 months is suicide. You may as well take them out when you first brought them home and put them down, because all of your work was for naught. They don't know. They're not old enough. People are going to say, well, I'm cruel, but I would far sooner put an animal down humanely than let it starve to death. I don't want to be the first guy to walk into that area where that cat is, because he doesn't know the area. He could be killed or eaten by the ones that live there. He doesn't know where to hunt. He doesn't know where the water is. Things are totally different, so he's going to get hungry real quick and go after whatever he can find. these things are dangerous.
But the volunteers did not see things that way. They felt they'd saved the cougars from certain death. They'd built them a home and had raised them, and now they were going to set them free. At the moment of release, the cougars lingered, reluctant to say goodbye, and then they slipped into the bush like ghosts. 3 more cougars were now running wild in the Alberta foothills. 3 more case studies for biologists to learn from. 3 more chances for cougar-human encounters. It would not be long before man and these cubs would meet again. Near the tip of Vancouver Island, another cougar was also running free. Jean and Penny Sloan were avid campers, and they often spent their nights relaxing in their plastic shelter by the ocean. It was on one of these nights that a young cougar paid them a dangerous visit.
We were sitting playing cards in the evening. Suddenly something hit the plastic with great force. And it really frightened us because we didn't know what it was. I could see a trace of brown moving around the corner. We could both see him clearly standing on the other side of the plastic. Like, it was just one of those moments where everything stops for a minute and we look at him and he looks at us, and frightening.
We yelled at it and screamed at it. We thought, well, it's going to go away. It's bound to run away.
He didn't, so I picked up the chair, and we're still yelling, and Gene is hitting the plastic, and he just isn't going to go.
So I figured, well, I'll take the lantern, just put that in front of his face. This has got to scare him. Well, he took the lantern. If he'd have got in that 14 by 20 foot little plastic building, one of us would have got eaten up. So the only thing we could do was keep him out. Whatever it took to keep him out. So I yelled at her, I said, just get me the axe.
Get away from here!
Finally, the cougar stopped moving, so we thought, well, he's dead.
So we grabbed our lantern and headed for the trailer. Ended up phoning the conservation officer to make sure we let him know what happened to one of his critters.
They wanted to know if we would go back down and make sure that the cougar was dead. And of course, we weren't really happy about doing that because we weren't really sure either. So Gene took the truck down and looked, and the cougar was gone.
Conservation officers soon arrived. The mountain lion was found nearby and shot.
Amazingly enough, when they did corner it, he did have enough strength in him to attack the dogs. He did wound one of the dogs.
Well, I feel sorry for their plight because we all have to eat, and like bears and a lot of other animals can choose to eat something else. Cougars can't. Wolves can't. Like, they must eat meat. So if there's no meat to be had, obviously they're finding it in other ways. And I can't say that I blame them. When I see the condition that that cougar was in, I'd have attacked me too.
Vancouver Island is experiencing some of their lowest deer populations ever. The Sloans feel this may be why more attacks have happened on the island than anywhere else in the world. Jean and Penny were fortunate. The plastic around their shack gave them the time they needed to defend themselves. In most cases, the attacks come silently and suddenly.
If a cougar is going to attack a human, and which they will do mainly from behind, they'll probably hit you on the shoulders with their front feet, knock you to the ground, and bite the back of your neck or the top of your head, wherever the most vulnerable spot is,
It tries to use vegetative cover or landscape features such as boulders or ridge lines, rock outcrops in order to very closely approach their prey. And so they probably will not launch an attack until they're within 10 to 30 meters of their prey.
First of all, it's always good to carry a big stick with you. It can be used to help you walk up the trail, but it can also be used for defense if you need it. It's much safer walking with somebody else than alone. If you have children with you, keep them within arm's length. Don't let them run up ahead on the trail or lag behind. If you happen to see a puma, first thing you want to do is stop. Never run from a puma. Face the animal. If at that point it's likely it's going to run away. But if it doesn't, if it stands its ground, the first thing you want to do is look larger. If you have a backpack on, you might want to pick it up over your head or put your arms up over your head. First thing, though, if you have children, is bring them to you and pick them up. If that's not working and the cougar is showing any kind of aggressive tendencies, always be aggressive or at least show your dominance in that situation, because that's what you need to show that you are too formidable for that puma to come in and try to attack. And if it does attack you, fight back.
Cougars are recolonizing their land, a land busy with humans, and encounters are inevitable.
I think if we keep sprawling and invade their territory, it'll forever be a problem.
In less than 40 days, the cougar kittens that had been released into the wild had 7 encounters with humans, none of which resulted in injuries. But the approaches were direct and without fear. In daylight, they climbed the porch of a backcountry cabin and tore apart a mop. A hiking shoe also went missing, and cougar scat was later found with traces of grass, spruce needles, and nylon, which may have come from the shoe. The cougars were starving and had little fear of humans. Officials decided to recapture them, but they could only find 2. When the 3rd was discovered later, it had died from starvation.
A happy story would have been that the mother didn't get killed, and the next possible one was that they made it in the wild.
The survivors were brought here, to the Calgary Zoo, where they remain.
The life they have here is that of a captive animal. I think it's a reasonable compromise for them, and I think they're very well looked after. But they're not wild animals. But it's not storybook. Storybook would be them out in the wild, happily living with radio collars on.
In the wild, the life of a cougar is hard. They rarely live past the age of 9. Mountain lions in captivity have been known to live to 20. Although disappointed that the kittens could not be reintegrated, Dr. Lise Decellier still visits the cougars she helped to save.
When baby cougars are found by the side of the road and the mother has been killed, we know it's not the solution to put them in a small, 15 meters square meters enclosure. It's not the solution.
So what is the solution, and who will pay for it? The experience showed that if we are to raise orphan cougars destined for release, they need a large space to live in, and also the chance to learn to hunt large prey. A diet of roadkill and rabbits just isn't enough.
We have a privilege to live in this wonderful world and to enjoy nature, but we also have responsibilities toward them, and our responsibility is try to preserve their habitat and give them a chance to survive in our world as well.
There's no question in my mind that pumas and humans can coexist in the same environment as long as we leave ample room, wild country, and landscape linkages for those pumas to make a living.
We have to decide whether we want pumas in the long term. And if we do, a lot of it's going to come down to how we behave. We have to realize that we're in puma country, and we have to act as if we are in puma country. Hopefully we'll learn some of the ways that we can alleviate those bad or potentially bad interactions between pumas and humans. And I think a lot of it's going to fall on our shoulders.
If mountain lions and humans are to coexist, we must understand what we can do to avoid a dangerous encounter. We are in the forest more than ever, and we are being watched. How closely is up to all of us.